maybe they would say this subconsciously, go and make converts or go and see people make decisions for Jesus. But that's not the word he used.
Yeah.
The word he used was make disciples. We create this culture where that's the thing. Like pastor has God's ear and nobody else does, or pastor knows the answers and nobody else does. Discipleship happens face to face. That's the way Jesus did it.
Yeah.
He preached to people. Yes. I don't know that he was discipling them necessarily as he was preaching it in the way that I understand the word.
All right, Jake. So it is an honor to have you with me today and to get to pick your brains about discipleship. For those who don't know you, you're a church planner, but you're not the normal, like you didn't go to Bible school to be a pastor, career minded. Like that's not how you got into this, which is cool if that's somebody else. But I want to highlight your stories. Obviously, our whole ordinary movement is about ordinary people that just take that next step and being disciples and making disciples. And did you think that you were going to be a pastor? Like when you were growing up, college?
No, I knew I was called to follow Jesus, but I didn't know that I was going to pastor a church. I thought I was going to be Tom Cruise and fly jets.
Yeah, and you're a Marine, right?
Yes,
military
Marine.
service.
Yep, I went to the Naval Academy. I was gonna go there and fly. Super Hornets. And then I decided I just wanted to be a platoon commander. Became a Marine. Did that for roughly 10 years. And then transitioned from that into defense contracting. And government work and business ownership and leadership, and did that for a good amount of time, and finally accepted the call to plant a church. So from an ordinary man kind of a standpoint, what I always tell our church is, listen, like nobody ever paid me to read my Bible. Nobody ever paid me to pray. Like this was not my vocation. I was Marine Jake, then I was business Jake way before I was Pastor Jake.
And maybe I'm picking on kind of the like normal like career path trajectory of pastors, and I was a pastor. It is because we need more. Like I have this pet peeve of like, why are the only church planners young guys that feel called to be pastors? You know what I mean?
They're
like
youth pastors who want to.
How old are you?
How old am I? 44.
44. So like, where are the other like 44, 50-year-old guys, and families that feel called into ministry and that are shifting out of career into like church planting next steps?
I think they don't see a path. They don't see a model of anybody else doing it, because, it's like the first woman that is an astronaut, until little girls see other girls doing it, they're not going to do it. And I think for most folks, they get into that season of life. Like, well, I'm in my 40s now. This is my biggest earning period of my life. This is when I'm going to make my most money to provide for retirement. And so that's definitely a inhibitor of some people making the leap. But I think, man, Jesus just calls us and we got to say yes.
I was thinking like lack of invitation. Just towards older demographics to take new next steps in ministry.
For sure. And I think vocational ministers oftentimes don't ask because of those things. Like, well, you've got a job, you've got kids. There's no way that you would make a sacrifice, because it is a big sacrifice to step out of owning a business into full-time ministry. Like that's a huge step for anybody to take. But I'm always encouraged. Like we have guys in our church who, I was talking to a guy just the other day. He works on base. He's a weapons instructor. And he desperately loves Jesus, and he loves discipling men. He's really good at it too. Like he's called to do that, and he just wants to know what's next. Like, and he's the kind of guy that I know if I told him, man, I think God is asking you to take a bigger leap, he would do it. And so I just don't think we ask often enough.
I totally agree. Well, man, this is good. So let me kind of go back a little bit then. Like, let's talk about discipleship.
Sure.
I feel like it's such a simple thing, but like, how do you define discipleship?
Sure. So I say this a lot in our church is a disciple of Jesus isn't just someone who says what Jesus said. There's someone who does what Jesus did. And Jesus made disciples who made disciples. So I think there's I'm not just doing miracles and preaching, but I'm doing what Jesus did, and Jesus made disciples who make disciples. And that last distinction is pretty important. Is a multiplication mindset.
You feel like that's that multiplication mindset? Do you feel like that's a common kind of like part of the definition that we're seeing today in large church culture?
No, I don't. I don't think that. I mean, the word multiply, you hear that, but I think it's more multiplying churches.
Mm.
I think we talk more about multiplying vocational ministers,
Okay.
and not necessarily about multiplying disciples of Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. What does that look like?
Um,
And I mean, in the way, like, if you were to think through like Mana Church now,
mm-hmm.
what would be a vision for what you think that might look like? Because I think that's part of it is just like some mindset around ministry is like we plant a church, we're there, until we die there.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if there is a vision for multiplication, and if there is, it might just be another extension of that church. But I hear you saying something different. Like, what does that maybe look like?
There is 100% a vision for multiplication, and we always talk about we want to equip people, and then we want to see them go plant churches with the same vision, whether it's a Mana church or whether it's something else. Like, we have a very specific mission for our church that is unique, that we want to plant churches near military bases. And so we've got 273 locations we've targeted that we want to plant a church. And if someone wants to plant a church somewhere else, that's great. Doesn't need to be a Mana church. We'll still equip them and support them and see them go out. But
that right there is, I think, a big deal. Like, you're saying, like, how you handle if somebody feels called to plant and it doesn't look like Mana.
Yeah. I mean, well, at the end of the day, Jesus didn't give us a great commission and said he didn't have Mana church in his definition, right?
Yeah.
He said, go and make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and teach them to obey the commandments. And so, I think churches a lot of times, and pastors particularly, at least ones that I've seen of quote unquote successful churches, they insert a word in the Great Commission that isn't there. They would say the Great Commission is go and make, and maybe they would say this subconsciously, go and make converts, or go and see people make decisions for Jesus. But that's not the word he used.
Yeah.
The word he used was make disciples.
Yeah.
And so you can have people raise their hand on Sunday. You can have people even follow Jesus in water baptism. But if they're not actually doing the things that Jesus did, you're not done with the Great Commission yet.
Yeah.
You've just had them make a micro commitment towards the lifelong journey of following Jesus. And that's the real commitment that we want people to make is, I mean, he says, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So are you actually, and I know pastors, you guys know that word means immersion.
Yeah.
Like, are you immersing people in who Jesus, who the Father, who the Holy Spirit is? Like, are you actually doing that when it comes to making disciples? Like, when they see those people, they're like, man, that person's just covered with Jesus. That person's just covered with the Holy Spirit. Like, they walk in a way that, I mean, a prayer that I prayed is, Lord, make me someone you could trust with your name.
Yeah.
And so if you have that heart for people, that you want them to be someone that Jesus would be proud to represent him, like walking in a manner worthy of the calling to which they've been called, that should be our mission.
Yeah.
And not just get them to raise their hand. Great. Okay. Did they get in a small group? Great. And then we're done. Like, that's not success. It's a lifelong journey.
I don't think pastors, in my mind, like, the more I've worked with pastors over the last years, I don't think that like they like it's almost like they're just unaware that there's more. Like, it's like that's such a simple, like, they see that's what they've heard as kind of the definition of success. And I just wonder if there's just a lack of awareness of like better thought, better mindset, better strategy, better pathway towards, like, it's not just more people, more decisions, but it's like vision for like what can church look like. And there's just not a lot of vision out there outside of just,
well, there's its vision, but it's vision for what you see on Instagram and TikTok and these mega churches. So I think pastors, unfortunately, and I've noticed this even in the short amount of time that I've become a pastor. I wasn't networked with all these other pastor guys. And so, I didn't know all the church names of this guy's church, that guy's church. And so as I've connected with more pastors and become more well-versed in that, what I realize are the things that pastors care about are not necessarily the things that people in their churches care about.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there are times where pastors care about things. It's because Jesus cares about it and they want their people to care about it. So there's a misalignment there. But there are other times where pastors don't care about the things that Jesus care about. They care about things that other pastors care about.
The pressure.
And that's not the mission.
Yeah.
The mission isn't to build a platform. The mission is to build disciples.
Yeah.
And
so there's like the natural progression, like somebody may end up being a church planner, which is a expression of disciple making.
Yep.
But I wouldn't say like the average person goes from like, give my life to Jesus, I'm a disciple, and I become a church planner.
Yeah.
And that wasn't even your own.
No.
Like, so talk to me about disciple making between being a disciple and being a church planner.
Yeah.
For you.
So I think the first step for me and the first step for anybody, and we do this, I think pretty well at Manna with our growth track, is we start off with the idea that every single person is a leader. Mm-hmm. So once they accept Jesus, if you can convince them of the reality and the truth that you are a leader, that naturally lends itself to discipleship. Because at the heart of discipleship is Jesus saying, follow me.
Yeah.
And so if someone accepts Jesus and it's like, okay, great. Now in pretty short order, I'm going to help you understand you're a leader. You have a testimony. You have a story. There's a pathway for you to help other people take the steps that you've taken and learn the lessons that you've learned, whether because you did it well or you did it poorly, and you can encourage them. If you can convince them of that, you're going to help them along that path. And for me, I think that's what I realized when I did get called into ministry before I became a pastor while I was still a Marine, but I didn't know what it was going to look like. I just knew that I was going to take a larger role when it came to caring for God's people. So I often would tell people that ask me what I do for a living, and I would say, well, I know what you're asking. You're asking about my vocation, but my occupation is like what occupies my thoughts and my margin is I'm a pastor, but I get paid by the Marine Corps to go do this Marine Corps stuff. Yeah. And so I think if we were to help people realize that Jesus has an occupation that he gives to every single one of us when he gives us gifts empowered by the Holy Spirit, that you're a helper, you're a servant, you're an administrator, you're a pastor, you're an evangelist, a prophet, an apostle, you're whatever it is, like that is who you are. Yeah. And all this other stuff is just kind of what you do. Yeah. But if you help them realize that's who they are and that they can make disciples out of that calling, that's a huge step to getting them more involved in the Great Commission. So
what are some things that you just practically did prior to the being the church planner? Like,
yeah. So the first thing we did was I met with my pastor and talked to him about what was in my heart, and he affirmed some things and said, why don't you start leading a small group? And I felt very ill-equipped to do it. My wife was not super jazzed about the idea either, but loved our church. It was New Hope Windward, Wayne Cordero's network of churches out in Hawaii. And they're like, hey, if you can pop a video in your DVD player and open up your home with some snacks, you can be a small group leader. And we'll give you all the materials. So I had people who gave me things to sort of lower the barriers to entry, which was really helpful. And then one of the best things I think that happened was I started getting involved in people's lives. Yeah. And not being embarrassed to ask them hard questions, because I know for me, I needed people to ask me hard questions and challenge me. And so I just started caring for people. And when you care for someone, you're going to ask them more about themselves than you are just tell them about yourself. And so I'd ask folks questions. I'd invite them to coffee. We'd talk and you'd hear about their life. And man, if you're spending time with Jesus and you love him, he's going to give you things to bless them with. And they don't need to know that you're discipling them. I think that's another thing we probably get wrong is we formalize discipleship relationships. And I tell people all the time, like, pick people that you should be discipling, but don't tell them that you're discipling
Yeah,
them.
people we don't like in our culture is such a it's just don't overthink it, don't overweight the vocabulary of it. Just start investing in people, helping people, serving people, helping people, point people towards Jesus, what it looks like to follow Jesus.
Yeah,
asking them questions how they're following.
Yes,
not that you have to even tell them what to do. You're just asking them, how's it going?
Yeah,
and then you might have an opportunity to share what you've learned along the way.
Exactly, and my wife's a counselor, so she's great at asking questions. So I've learned a lot from her.
Yeah.
But it's really easy. People don't want to be in a pipeline. They don't want to think that they don't want you to come in and be presumptuous that you're mentoring them or discipling them. But what I've found is if you serve people, if you go low and just care about somebody and serve them, the authority is not in what they call you. The authority is in the Spirit of God that He's put in you.
Yeah.
And so people come into discipleship relationships, I think oftentimes looking at, well, I'm an authority now in your life.
Yeah.
But the authority doesn't come from you. The authority comes from the Word of God. And Jesus tells us to serve people. And so you just start serving somebody and they're going to want more of that and naturally come to you more for more of that good stuff that really comes from the Lord. That's discipleship.
Yeah, I think there's like Charles, I just quoted this the other night. I was doing evangelism training. Charles Spurgeon said like evangelism is like beggars telling other beggars where to find bread. And I think it's like we have to like think about discipleship even on this. It's like it's not that we're the expert and all of a sudden we're looking for the new apprentice. It's just, and we found something that just gave us life and we want to help people find life.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Not that we've figured it out or that we've, we're now the because there is that weird like teacher student, and that's not what we're trying to get people into.
Absolutely not. No. And that is one of the biggest barriers for people who, you've got people who maybe think a little bit more highly of themselves than they ought to, and they want to jump into discipleship. And so they'll do it the wrong way by asserting too much influence. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have people who think so low of themselves. They're like, there's no way I have anything to offer. It's like, man, just go serve somebody.
Yeah.
Like, just go be with them. Do you spend time in the Word? Great. Like, share, ask them to read the Bible with you.
Yeah.
That's the simplest thing. That's kind of like the Alpha Course way of doing things. Just, hey, would you read the Bible with me?
Yeah.
And that's discipleship.
Yep. Yeah. No, that's good. So you were involved. I know, like, you told me about the small group that you led for years.
Yes.
Still
do it.
Yeah. So let's just kind of give me a soundbite on that. Cause I think that's like you go from like church going, everyone can church go, but everyone can then take some intentional next step into the disciple making area. I think groups, it could be, it could be one-to-ones.
Mm-hmm.
There comes a point where like a group makes more sense than one-to-ones.
Yeah.
But anyone listening, it's like, we want people to just take a step.
Yes.
And give people opportunities and show different ways they can.
Mm-hmm.
But what's the backstory in that group?
Yeah. So my wife and I were leading a small group at the church, and it was great. We had like 14 families. There were a couple guys though who independently had approached me and they'd asked to meet with me. Like, hey, can we just get together a little bit?
Yeah.
And I said, sure, that would be great. And then I realized that, well, first off, they're brothers-in-law and they're pretty good friends with one another as well.
Yeah.
So they're not just family. They actually like each other and they both love Jesus. And so I said, are you guys okay if we just meet the three of us together at one point?
Yeah.
And so we did. I think it was the second time I met with each of them. And I said, I think what you guys are asking for is you're asking me to meet with you to just sort of like talk about the Lord, like together, just the two of us.
Yeah.
So why don't the three of us do it? And also, I'm going to tell you there are some requirements that I would have. Like, these are some of my things that I would need.
Yeah.
And one of them is that we meet every other week, at least. We meet in person. Everybody talks.
Yeah.
And we pray for each other.
Yeah.
And it's confidential. Like, if we can do those things. Nothing's off the table. Like, any question.
Yeah.
Any question. And so, and I told them, like, I need you to understand this has to be something that is life-giving for me as well. So if we're going to do this together, then I need you to be able to challenge me as well. So
Sure.
Immediately from the outset, there was a little bit of a leveling of things. Like, they had asked me to sort of sit with them, but I was letting them know, like, man, I'm going to have stuff too.
Which kind of took the pressure off of you.
It did. And it,
in a healthy way.
It did. And it helped them have the space to just openly share.
Yeah.
And so, oftentimes it gave me the space too, to be, an example for them in a way that I couldn't, if I was putting myself on a pedestal almost. It allowed me to just be like, hey guys, let's talk, man. This is what's going on in my marriage this week.
Yeah.
And I could say it. Whereas if I had all this pressure that I've got to be the most godly person in the discussion, I've got to be the perfect example, then I'm not being vulnerable and they're not going to be vulnerable as well.
Yeah.
And so we started this relationship that, I mean, it's going on 11 years now. We've been doing this.
Okay.
And, from that, what's been really cool is, our discussion that we've had. Other people have heard about it, whether in a small group or something else. And other guys have come to each of us and said, hey, why won't you guys do this with us?
Yeah.
And so now Aaron got involved with Ordinary Men, which has been fantastic.
Yep.
And David has done a bunch of small groups. And I have 3 other groups that I have done as a result of that small group that do the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And one of those groups has already multiplied into another group.
Yeah.
And so it's cool. It's like, it started off with 3 guys and now it's turned to probably over a dozen groups of people who are just committed to getting together with each other, sharing. It's not a high intense sort of environment. Like, we make the space, whatever the space needs to be, the time, whatever the time needs to be, but we're committed to those things. Like, we're going to meet every week, every other week. We're going to meet face to face. Everybody's going to share and we're going to pray, like.
That's awesome.
So it's simple.
I wish that was the, like I feel like you lived out church planting in that environment of groups, to where now it's like you're just doing it on a larger scale. You've established more, to where it's like more people, more weight, more responsibility, but you've proven the concept, so to speak. Maybe different. It's different model, but but the components of discipleship and disciple making and leading and multiplying, you already lived that before you now have planted a church, to where I just think that's an ideal. Like, I would love for people listening, who are maybe aspiring church planners. Like, that's what I would love every church planner to be able to say, like, man, this is what I was doing, to where you just felt then called to go to another level of intentionality and higher capacity into it.
Yeah, that's 100% what it was. It's time to multiply this. It's time to allow this to have a bigger impact for people, not because I needed a platform or anything else, but our church is composed of a lot of those guys that we were getting together with and their families.
Which again is a natural, like,
and the cell and the celebration, right?
I throw this out there because, like, I know young men and women who want to go into the next step of ministry, and it's just like, but they're not already doing it. Yeah. Like, they have an idea of what ministry is, which I think is really dangerous, because then all of a sudden they get into something and they didn't realize, like, what it was. Yeah. And so anyone listening, like, if you're thinking about church planning, or you're thinking about you want to be a pastor, like, that's like living out what you did in that experience would be my hope and my coaching towards someone out there listening. Yeah.
Well, because discipleship is the mission. The mission is not the way we do Western church. Yeah. So we're not following a model. We're following a man who happens to also be God, and his name is Jesus. And so if you're following some model, you want to be Church of the Highlands, or if you're in our area, Life Point, or one of these other big churches, well, that's not the goal. Right. The goal is people. The goal is for them to follow Jesus. And so, but yeah, these guys that did this with us, they felt like, almost like there was a level playing field. Like, I'm not saying that I'm not a leader and the pastor, but even in church culture, I think you correct me if I'm wrong. This would be like a thought with as a question. Cool. I think we've overweighted the pastor title, to where I wonder if actually, like, pastors who call themselves pastor and make everybody call them pastor, does that set in the culture of like that like, we're called to honor people in leadership. Sure. And there's offices of leadership, but there is this like what you're talking about, like we put pastors on these professional pedestals,
And then I think people feel like they're not qualified to do discipleship and disciple making or to be church planners because they have to be where that person is.
Yeah.
They have to, like, they feel like they missed their years of going to school. They'd have to go to school again. I mean, there's all of this, like, so talk to me a little bit about, correct me if I'm wrong. And you're talking about that culture, which was, it felt more like a level playing field. You are, God's called you to be the leader of it.
Sure.
But there's different ways of leading, and you're leading differently.
Yeah. So it's funny. The families who sort of initially launched with us, they call me Jake. Like, that's what they call me.
Yeah.
But what we even talked about this at a staff meeting recently. And when I say staff, I don't mean paid staff. Like, our people who are lay leaders, they have full-time jobs.
Yeah, I want to talk about that.
They're staff members.
Yeah, we'll get into that because that's part of your
Cool.
story too.
Yeah. But one of the things I've had to tell them is, like, we did this fun thing called Pie the Pastor this last Sunday.
Yep.
And it was for missions. We raised like $1,100 just so people could throw pies at a few of the folks on our staff. And I had to let some of the people on our staff know, guys, we may have folks who are pretty traditional in our church, and that may feel dishonoring to them. Like, we just need to message it in a way that they know, like, I'm on board with this. I think this is cool. And some of them were like, really? People are going to think that it's weird that you get pied. I'm like, yep, they don't know me as Jake.
Or Bible Belt.
They know me as Pastor Jake. And there are even people who, like, I don't care what you call me as long as you don't call me a bad name, but they need to call me Pastor Jake based on where they're at in their life. For them, like, they feel like they want to call me pastor. And it's like, okay, you can call me that if that makes you feel good. But
sure.
But I don't need that.
Yeah.
I have a role. One of the things we say at our church is there are models of church. There's one church where you have this guy who it's his church that everybody goes to. And then there's this other model of church where it's our church. And there's somebody who has this role of lead pastor. And there's somebody who has this role of, whatever other titles you want to put in there, but it's our church. Yeah. And we want to do church this way. And it's not that church can't work, but man, I really feel like this church is closer to the model of the Bible.
Hey, friend, we're going to jump right back into this discussion about discipleship and disciple making. But before we jump in, let me just highlight ordinarymovement.com, because that is the reason that I have been able to provide this podcast in the first place. There's this whole community and a movement of disciple making where we've basically taken this entire process of discipleship. We've distilled it into a group model, taking people through 26 sessions. We have a men's track, a women's track, and we have a track that can fit in just for men and women together. It fits into church structures with small groups. It also fits into a person's daily life, where even if they've never even been in a small group and their churches don't have small groups, they don't even know where to begin. It is for the local church and meant to be done with and through your local church, but it is also designed for ordinary men and ordinary women. And it was designed by ordinary men and ordinary women. And so anyone, be a roofer, an entrepreneur, a business person, a stay-at-home mom, a waiter, whatever level of education you have or don't have, it doesn't matter. We've taken all the guesswork out of how do you bring together people and learn how to follow Jesus together in a high challenge, high grace environment that helps people become disciples who make disciples. And it's all available to you. Check it out at ordinarymovement.com. All right, back to the show. Well, I think I like stats. I don't know. I'm a nerd now. I like spreadsheets, but the stats show traditional church is not working very well.
Yeah.
It's on a slow trajectory of it's not even plateauing, it's dying.
Yeah.
So like more churches are closing every year than new churches are. It's outpacing. There's always going to be the small rural churches that are hanging on by a thread. They're hard, not that we want anything to close, but there are the state of the church is not great. And
Sure.
There are new churches coming out, church plants. Not even every church plant that is planted makes it 2 years later. Point in being is that we need better expressions of church. We need churches to reexamine, model, and what we do and why we do it. And is it discipleship oriented or is it platform ministry oriented? Yeah. And there's some traditional mindsets around church and even church leadership that I do think hinders discipleship growth. And some of that is kind of I preached at a church recently. And if you're listening to this, that wouldn't be a criticism. It would be an invitation, to make a change. I drove up and the first signs that were in the parking lot, closest to the door, were for the music director and the lead pastor, and then a couple handicap spots.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then, or it's the church sign where it's it's the church name, and then it's the pastor name.
Yeah.
And it's just this like, but like, that's what church has turned into, but you don't see that same church culture when you read the Bible. You see the like, hey,
Sure.
our leaders are like, they're not to be served, they're to serve.
100%.
And then I think that even that whole kind of religious traditional leadership mindset, I do think that's hindering a discipling culture.
Yeah, well, because as leaders, if everybody's coming to me, if I'm the only person who is on the platform or has God's ear or I'm his favorite, and we create this culture where that's the thing, like pastor has God's ear and nobody else does, or pastor knows the answers and nobody else does, man, we miss out on the idea that we're a body, right? Like
Yeah.
we're all members of it.
Yeah.
And I think one of the most beneficial things when it comes to discipleship that I found I was blessed with, and I've tried to do it with other people, is my pastor didn't solve all the problems of people who I was discipling, whether they knew I was discipling them or not.
Yeah.
When there was an issue in my small group, I took care of it. And sometimes really, really well, and sometimes not super great, but I called in help when I needed it.
Yeah.
And so helping people understand, like get them to make that commitment. Like, can you be a small group leader? Can you do this? And then allowing them to actually pastor people, allowing them to actually love people, and allowing them to get involved in their lives. I think a lot of times pastors want to be the heroes. And so what I've also seen happen is when there's little stuff that they just need kind of growth, well, I don't have time for them. But if it's a big issue, then you can bring it to me, because that's the one that's going to make the big impact. And man, I think that there are people who are very well equipped to give folks the heart of God, who are in the church, and the pastor doesn't need to be involved. The pastor should be pastoring that person who's then helping the folks on their team or in their small group or whatever. And so you rob them of that opportunity if you come in as the guy on the platform and save the day every single time.
Yeah.
So discipleship happens that way.
Yeah. It's Ephesians 4,
Yes.
What is it, 10 through 12?
Equip the saints for the work of the ministry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's beautiful and it's happening. I think if people are listening, they're maybe they're a pastor and they're like, they haven't, maybe they've wanted to see a church planted out of their congregation. They just haven't seen out why. I think sometimes you could look back at like, well, where do I have room for people to be developed as leaders?
Have I given people opportunities?
Yeah.
Like if you feel exhausted as a pastor, I would ask you, how many times are you fixing the problem? And how many times are you telling a leader the solution that they can apply to fix the problem that's going on?
Yeah. More spaces than just deacons and elders.
Yes, exactly.
It's giving people room to now start, sharing the pulpit.
Mm-hmm.
But also with that is like, hey, if you make a mistake, I'm going to come up and correct it in a gracious way.
Yeah.
But then not even just pulpit ministry, because there's so much more like I don't see small groups as like a trend. I see it as an outlet that allows everyone to engage in using their strengths and gifts.
Sure.
And I think churches need small groups for that reason. Do all small groups do well at discipleship? No, but you get into like small group model design.
Mm-hmm.
But I do see it as a really helpful outlet, for churches that are established, that are trying to figure out how do we get out of just church's Sunday morning service.
Yes, I do think that that's another issue in church is, and I heard a pastor say this one time, and I kind of cocked my head sideways, is I asked him, well, so what do we do at this church for discipleship? And he said, look, my main job is preaching on Sunday. That's how I disciple people, is by preaching to them. And I'm like, well, you're teaching them. I don't know that you're discipling them, because I don't think discipleship happens primarily on a Sunday morning.
It's like a facet.
Yeah. Discipleship happens face to face. Like that's the way Jesus did it. Yeah. He preached to people. Yes. I don't know that he was discipling them necessarily as he was preaching it in the way that I understand the word. Yeah. I think discipleship happens like this. You and I talking and us exchanging the life that God has in us and growing closer to the Lord. But just preaching at somebody, well, a lot of people can say the things that Jesus said, but are you doing the things that Jesus did? And you're only going to know that if you see me in life. And so discipleship is about inviting people into your life. And I know, especially as pastors, you can't do that for everybody.
Yeah.
It's impossible. And we're a church that's growing, and we're at a capacity where it's like, I need to bring on somebody else to be able to do this more with other folks. But man, there are some people I can do it for. And I think a lot of pastors retreat away from the one-on-one discipleship with people, that committed, life-giving relationship.
Yeah.
And they focus more on the pulpit ministry. And that's where you start to get confused about the mission.
Which things are changing though. Like that's always been true.
Mm-hmm.
But what I mean now is, like, I think it's even harder now to hide behind that, because you can get the best teachings in the world on YouTube in an instant.
Yes. Yeah. You can't compete with some of the folks who are talking online.
You have legends who are dead, and now you can find all their content and listen to it anytime. So it's like, if churches don't provide better, opportunity, connect, community, discipleship, if it's just, they're going to hinge around like, you're a great teacher, you're going to have to be better than the people on YouTube if it's just your teaching ability.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, people don't necessarily, like your kids, they don't do what you say. They don't become what you tell them to become. They become what you are, what you show them. And that happens in proximity. It doesn't happen on a stage or on a video screen. Like, yeah, there's growth that can happen. So I'm not, like, this podcast hopefully will minister to people, and they'll take some stuff from it, and they'll grow. But
no, that's so good. Like,
the growth you're going to get is in person primarily, I think.
Yeah. Like Brittany and I, so I led a evangelism training class the other night. And one of the things that we did in the class was, like, we actually did practice, like set up mock scenarios, stage it out. I try to be very theatrical in the staging of it, but we allowed people to take turns being the messenger, being the recipient, and then made sure there was feedback at the end of each time. But and I bring that up because in a lot of church environments, like from the platform, we tell people to share the gospel, but people haven't really been coached on how to share the gospel, let alone in that kind of small group environment. Like, no one's ever actually seen their pastor share the gospel with someone. I mean, no one is an exaggeration, but you know what I mean? Like,
they see it 1 to 50, 1 to 100. They don't see it 1 to 1.
It's very different how you and I are coaching people to share the gospel from a platform and a mic versus how I do it in the coffee shop.
Yep.
And people getting to watch and learn, or even at least practice that kind of environment and see how you would.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I love Jesus' interactions with the people who changed the world, the disciples, the apostles. They were one-on-one, where he said, follow me. It wasn't like there was this great big group and then there were 2 people that popped up out of the group. I mean, maybe I'm missing one of the disciples, but I don't think there was ever a group where he solicited, do we have any volunteers? Is anybody going to respond to this altar call? And then you're going to come follow me. Like, no, it was, hey, will you come follow me? Like, come do this. And so that personal connection, that personal call was something that changed the world. And in fact, I can't prove this. Okay. And maybe you've heard this before, but I think it's so cool. If you look at the way that ministry exploded across the globe, it started with Jesus and his disciples, and then it really kind of cemented in the upper room when the Holy Spirit fell and filled all these people. And if you look at the number of people that were in the upper room, we always say Jesus had his 3, right? Peter, James, and John. If you look at the number of people in the upper room, it would almost, the numbers match up perfectly. If Jesus had his 3 and those 3 had 3, that's 12. And if those 9 had 3, that's 27. And if those 27 had 3, if you add all those numbers together, how many people you get? 120. Exactly. Again, I can't prove it.
Yeah.
That's the thing. But how cool is it that it could be that there were just 4 or 5 generations of believers who were there discipling one another, connecting, and that's how the Holy Spirit chose to evangelize the whole world.
And maybe sometimes as leaders we get nervous of, like, which 3 would I start with? And then what if I like, how do I only invest in them 3? There's so many. But when you're thinking as a strategic leader, it's here's the people I'm going to invest in now, and there's going to be an end date. where I'm going to
Yes.
challenge them to be sent out.
Yes.
And if they don't want to be sent, like, then they can, there's just going to be
Yeah.
a hard, high challenge, high grace conversation.
Yes.
And then you take another group of people and you
Mhm.
invest in them, pour into them with the intention that they're sent out.
That is one of the biggest aversions, I think, to one-on-one or one-on-3, one-on-4 discipleship is, how do we break up? Because
Yeah.
you want to create this relationship with them and really go deep, and you want to kind of do it pretty quickly. But if you have a multiplication mentality, there needs to be an end date.
And I don't even know that it's such a even like hardcore breakup.
Sure.
It can be like, y'all, like, I think we gamify. I don't know. This is the word I
Gamify.
like in the sense of like, all right, like, hey, I'm investing in you for the season because I believe in your potential and I want to see you then take that investment, pour into others, a multiplication oriented thing. Right. And then it's a, like, not even that it has to be a hard stop. It's like, if we've been meeting weekly or every other week, like, we're going to shift to every month or every other month. And we're going to talk about our challenges that we're going through so that we still have this camaraderie, but now we're running together.
Yeah.
And like, maybe I've done this a little bit longer than you, but like, we're all going to be facing very similar problems now because now we're all investing in these people and we can still run together.
Yeah.
There's ways where it's not even has to be like a hard breakup.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of what we want to see happen with our kids. My oldest just turned 18 and my relationship with him is changing, and that he's more of a peer than he's ever been in his life. And so he doesn't come to every family dinner. He doesn't, we don't have as many one-on-ones as we've had in the past because he's off doing other things, and that's great. And that's what we should want for people that we're pouring into as well, is for them to eventually move beyond us. And I think that's hard for a lot of pastors, is because they're accustomed to being the guy on the platform. And so for us, we need to be okay with people surpassing us in some things and cheering them on all the way through their finish line, because their finish line is not our finish line.
Yeah.
Like, there's different things that God's called us to. And so, and I've had people in my life, and pastors particularly, who almost didn't want me to launch. They wanted to keep me in their orbit longer than was necessary, but I could tell it had more to do with their ego than it did with my discipleship and well-being. And that's a big danger, is we got to let people launch.
So I had seen that and felt that for a long time. And it wasn't until Francis Chan spoke at some conference. He was talking about the priests and the whole, like, they retired. Was it like 50 something?
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't even put my Bible hat on.
That's good. That's good.
But they had to retire. And he just brought up, he wasn't getting like too dogmatic on like, here's the exact thing we need to do, but he was just saying how like he's now trying, and I correct me if I'm wrong for anyone out there, but like he's pouring into Andy Bird.
Okay.
Is kind of this young leader with YWAM now, and you see him now, like, he's kind of using his name and his influence, but he's propping up Andy. And he told everybody, like, he didn't say he was going to do it for Andy, but he just shared how, like, so often in ministry, the thing has been like, you see the pastor who's like, they're the one preaching and holding on to the leadership role and doing everything until they retire. Yeah. And we do see this issue hands down across the United States, especially in
succession planning.
There's no succession planning. Yeah. And then you got to bring this guy in. Nobody knows if they like him or not. He may not be the right fit, or with housing changes these days, you can't bring anyone in anymore, like whatever. So like, but he basically was just like, we have to, and I think it's like almost like a generational thing. Like, somebody in a generation of family has to make the hard change that the rest of the, are set up for success differently. If you think about it, like family planning with debt and inheritance and, someone has to change the, and they just have the harder, but so basically it's like, he didn't want to spend his last 10 years, 15 years, 20 years in ministry, getting to just do it all. And he's become the best speaker at the season of life, and he can do the best speaking, but then like he has nothing else left to actually give to the next person. And he basically was like, we need to shift into like our final years like are not just us doing it all, but it's like we're giving our best in final years now to giving our best to the next leader
Yes.
so they can learn from us and we can coach them. And you're just taking this like slowly, you're going into the back seat, even though you still could be doing all the leading, so that they can actually become a better leader. And really like your ceiling is their foundation.
Yes.
And I guess I just think of that of like, it's when you think about like, there's the mindset of like, there's pastors that have a hard time seeing somebody outgrow them or leave them to go and plant. And then there's this other mindset I think that I haven't seen talked about so much, let alone practiced, that I think is really beautiful.
Yeah, it takes a ton of humility. And I think that the platform naturally erodes humility in people if you approach it the wrong way.
Yeah.
And so in order to lead well, in order to disciple well, you have got to be a humble person.
Yeah.
And so I think humble people can say, and it's something we said, that this is my business Jake. In my business Jake years, one of the things that I learned was from a company I worked at. It was a Christian company, defense contractor. And our motto was, your success is our honor.
Yeah.
And as people who are discipling other people, and as pastors who are hopefully equipping and releasing other people, that's how we need to think.
Yeah.
And that's a healthy succession mindset, is your success, man, it's my honor for you to be successful.
Yeah.
I hope you're more successful than I was.
Yeah.
Not because I want to be less successful, but because I want you, like I want the very best that God has for you to be completely achieved in your life.
Yeah.
And
might be the 10 years before your retirement.
Yeah.
Everybody was, you're not preaching every Sunday. Like you kind of became less needed.
Yeah.
But like you really set up the next leaders for success so they can run, and you developed and multiplied yourself.
Yeah.
And worked yourself out of a job.
And when leaders hold on too long, I know it's not the purpose of this podcast necessarily.
Well, like we talked earlier, like the best discipleship I think is going to happen through the church, not apart from the church. And we need to look at some of these mindsets.
Sure. I mean, yeah, I guess that does really tie in, because as pastors, we need to be discipling our replacements, right? We should be doing that. And
it starts with our leadership, our vision, our mindset, what we're talking about. We're coaching our congregations on like, hey, here's why I'm leading this way. I know it's so counter church culture to what you see.
Yeah.
But like it does.
Well, I mean, one of the things that we've done, again, not that we get everything right, but one of the things that we did from the jump was we built a teaching team of people who are, there's 6 of us on it now. There were 3 originally, and now 2+ years in, there's 6 of us.
Yeah.
And every single sermon that we write gets submitted to the teaching team by Tuesday morning. We spend an hour going over it. And that does 2 things. One, it smoke checks me and whoever's preaching to make sure that it's good content and it's biblical content and life-giving for our people. But it also it disciples the other people who have a teaching gift that God has given them, or they have a preaching gift, which I think is a little different than a teaching gift, but they can exhort people. And sometimes you get people that are kind of prophetic and they can preach really well too. So, but it equips them and develops them. And the purpose is so that people don't need to see me in the pulpit. And so our church can
You're reducing the dependency.
100%. And it also allows us, if God blesses us with the opportunity to plant another church north or south or somewhere else along the highway, I can go, or one of our teaching team can go and be a part of that team.
Yeah.
And if you're not doing that, if you're not discipling people, not just into a godly lifestyle, which I think is the primary way we disciple people, but we also need to disciple people into their giftings.
Yeah.
That's super, super important.
Yep.
Someone who has a gift of administration, are you putting them in an orbit with other people who have that administration gift? People who are gifted when it comes to, just like understanding the word. Are you putting them in the orbit with other people who can do that? Good pastors need other good pastors so they can become great pastors.
Yeah.
So are you doing those things? And that's really, really important.
Oh, that's good. So I'm assuming then your teaching team are made up of also just bivocational people that are.
I wouldn't even call them bivocational. They are There are people. I'm the only person on our teaching team that
Like,
gets
they don't
paid.
have to go to seminary to preach on your
Well, I mean, I didn't go to seminary either.
Yeah.
So I love the Word of God.
I think for you and I, it's common sense, but again, I'm like, my hope is to kind of like poke and prod in a gracious, compelling way for people out there of like, we've got to get out of the like people have to go to Bible school to be in ministry, or we're not going to make it in the United States.
No, I mean,
like that's
none of the people that Jesus called were professional, vocational, religious folks.
Ordinary, unschooled.
They were just ordinary dudes.
If he wanted the best of the best that knew,
he could have, right?
Yeah, you know.
Yeah. So no, the guys on our teaching team, there is one guy who has, he writes books. He's a theologian.
Yeah.
But that's not his primary job. He does that in his basement for an hour and a half every morning before he starts his job.
Yeah.
That's not even his full-time job.
Which, to those listening, like for people who want to go deeper, like I you know, there's so many different schools. I'm liking like, how do you hack it? How do you fast track it? Don't compromise on the quality, but like there's certificates, there's free courses, there's things like if you feel like you need to know better hermeneutics, like how
audit a course.
Yeah, exactly.
Just
and then
audit a course.
You know, in lieu of feeling like you got to like totally quit doing disciple making and you've never even led a small group, go to Bible school and you never even finished Bible school and you never actually went and did what God put in your heart.
Yeah. We in our society have zero excuse to not be well versed in I mean, Google's a great thing. You've got good Bible tools like Logos, which is awesome. There's so many opportunities just with free content that's on the internet that you can get. And then there's tons of great schools. I mean, our network of churches has a university, and my wife and I are polar opposites. She's going to be a lifelong student who is getting degrees and certifications and everything else. I'm like, look, I got my undergrad degree and then the Marine Corps taught me to blow up stuff. That's good. Like, I'm good. I want to read great books. I want to read the Bible and just immerse myself in God's word. I want to learn on the job per se when it comes to discipling people and surround myself with folks who are smarter than me and learn that way. And then if I need to take some courses, I can do that. Like, I can get training. But my pastor, who this was years ago, he told me, he said, look, you can do it a few ways. You can do just on the job training and just get a job at a church as someone who's not schooled. You can go to seminary, and then when you get out, hope some church hires you, or I can build something for you. I can give you a bunch of books to read and some different, classes to maybe take, hermeneutics class here, a Greek class there, and you can do it that way. And that's really the path that I took.
Yeah. And I think there's probably like, if you're going to replace a lead pastor of a really established church and everybody's been in there for, generations and 30 years, you probably need to come in with some heavy Bible school so that you can replace the expectations of that environment. Mm-hmm. But for somebody who's just like, man, I want to plant a church and I want to reach unchurched people, you do not need all that.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Which the goal of church planting is not transference anyway.
Right.
Let alone getting all these people that have all the information anyway. So don't get caught up and feel like you got to go and reinvent, and restart.
God's going to send you people.
On the ground trainings totally suffice if the goal is to do church planting with unchurched people.
100%.
Yeah. And the people that come along on your team, if they see that you don't know it all, like, at the end of the day, you want people on your team that are missional. They're not all caught up of you saying the exact right thing. Like you want, there's team members that you want to do a church plant, and there's team members that you probably don't want.
Yeah. Well,
can you say that?
No, you can't say that. 100%.
Yeah. You know what I mean? 100%. Like, but we want them to change. We want them to have the heart of like, it's not about knowledge.
Yeah. So there's a thread that we've sort of touched on with the humility and, talking to people, and anybody can do it. It's okay to say, I don't know.
Totally.
But people feel like if I become a small group leader, that means I have to know the entire Bible cover to cover. And when someone asks me what Acts chapter 2, verse 4 means, I don't even know what that reference is, by the way. But when someone asks you what that verse is and what it means, you don't have to just have total recall and be able to say the verse, quote it in the Greek and everything. Like, no.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'll look at that and just be committed to giving them answer. That's one of the, if I go back to military, Jake, one of the best lessons I learned was at the Naval Academy. They gave us just 5 responses that we were only ever allowed to say. Yes, no, aye, no excuse, and I'll find out.
Yeah.
If they asked you a question you didn't know the answer, you weren't allowed to say, I don't know. You just said, I'll find out.
Yeah.
And that's a great answer for a pastor or someone who's discipling someone, because it communicates humility. You're saying, I don't know the answer, but it also communicates a willingness to grow. And it communicates that I'm for you. Like, you ask me a question, I don't know it. I'm not going to say, yeah, I don't know, go figure it out yourself. You say, I'm going to find out.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to go research this, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to give you the best answer I possibly can.
Yeah.
So it's important.
In our coaching for the Ordinary Movement small groups we do, that's part of what we tell people is just like, it's okay to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely say that instead of a bad answer.
For real.
But it's like, it's 100% normal to not have all the answers, and we want to normalize that. And you don't have to have all the answers to start. So final, I think, topic, the bivocational piece. So you've been doing all this stuff up until like you're now in the lead role at the church plant, but like you were doing discipleship, disciple making, ministry, all different types of things over the last years while working a job.
Yeah.
And you mentioned even now you have people on the church plant team. So I'm setting the stage, I guess, because I think this is one of the most strategic things that the churches need to figure out how to embrace. And it's a bit counter church culture with staff, career, Bible school, all that world. So speak to me a little bit about what it was like being bivocational. What are some of the pros and cons, challenges? Why do you think it's worth it?
Oh yeah. So great question. I mean, it was definitely a challenge. My wife and I, we had our first kid right at about the same time we started a small group, and we moved here to Virginia and continued to do that, led a young adult ministry, subsequently had 5 other kids. So we had a very young family, very busy life. I was a Marine, and then I became a defense contractor, working well over 40 hours a week in my defense job. But one of the things that I found was ministering to people gave me life. Like, I could spend my margin doing that, and it didn't feel like a burden.
Yeah.
Like, and so some people who maybe they're just a worshiper, man, if that's what God's put in you, you're going to find that that's going to give you life. Don't exchange more vocation for less of that. Like, you can do both simultaneously and find the margin. Like, God's gonna provide for you. And in the West, I think we spend a lot of time trying to pursue other things that take away from our ministry opportunities. So I don't want to create this false sense of expectation that you can do it all in the world and you can also do it all in church, because I don't know that you can.
I've given up fishing and hobbies to a great degree over the last years. Yeah.
I mean, golf. I would love to golf. I'm terrible at it.
Yeah.
But I don't have 4 hours on a Saturday to devote to that when I've devoted my week to doing other things and I have kids that I need to take care of. So yeah, we need to make sacrifices.
Like, I work full time. I do real estate. I oversee, if anyone listening, like, I oversee operations, with Ordinary Movement. I'm blessed to be full time in ministry. It just looks different, but I'm also doing these things. And then I just, like, my sacrifice in the season is, like, I don't have hobbies to provide for my family, and to know that, like, I am doing what God's called me to do. And when I stand before Jesus, like, I want to look back and see the investment I made in his kingdom, not the investment I made in my hobbies.
Yeah.
And Netflix time.
Yeah.
So
that is a really, the Netflix point's a really good point. Anybody listening who is considering full-time ministry, man, God should be challenging you right now on what you're using your time for. Because I know for me, God told me there's a gap between the person you need to be in order to plant a church or be in full-time ministry and where you're at. And you can spend that margin that you have either becoming that person, or you can spend that margin just watching Netflix, playing video games, wasting time.
Yeah.
And man, we've got such limited time here on earth.
And we don't want people that only do ministry when they're paid to do it.
No.
Like, if people aren't engaging in ministry outside of work hours, they really shouldn't be full-time ministry anyway.
No, I think I counted before I even committed to planning a church or any of that. There was one time where I counted how much weekly hours I spent, and it was between 12 and 20 hours that I was spending doing church stuff. But it actually made it way easier when I became a minister, like a vocational minister, because all of those hours that I was spending doing church stuff that I wasn't getting paid to do, I was like, wow, I actually in some cases, I got a little bit of time back because there were small groups that I was leading. I'm like, oh, this is part of my job. I can lead another small group now.
Yeah.
And, there was study time that I was spending just trying to really like dig into different topics that I needed to be well-versed on, that became a part of my job, or going to elders meetings, or all of those other things. Like those things I was just doing for free, and I didn't ever expect to get paid. Man, the first time somebody paid me to preach at their church, I didn't know what to do. It was so bizarre.
Yeah.
Like they gave me a check. I'm like, what is this? And they're like, oh, it's an honorarium. I'm like, for what? And they're like, for preaching this week. I'm like, wait, preachers get paid to preach at churches other than their church? You got to be kidding me. Which seems like I'm not that ignorant, but it was so natural for me. Like, I just want to do this because I love Jesus. And you're going to give me money to do this? That's kind of cool. So, yeah.
Well, so maybe for someone listening out there who I guess speak to the person who wants to be more in ministry, they're working the job. Like they're not like bivocational is a good, like I think a strategic starting point.
Yeah. So the first question I would ask is, what's your quiet time look like? If you are not spending time with Jesus daily, you can't expect to show him to people every day. And so, almost one of the things I said at the beginning, ask the Lord to make somebody he can trust with his word. Ask the Lord to make you somebody he can trust with his name. And that comes from spending time with him. Yeah. So are you in the word every day? And that's going to be the best teacher. Are you spending time praying? Are you talking with the Father? Are you engaging, communing with the Holy Spirit? And then, where are you serving? You won't even know what you're good at if you're not in your church. It's like, people come to our church, are like, where can I serve? My first question to them isn't based on what needs we have as a church. My first question to someone, I just got asked yesterday. I said, well, what are you good at? What do you like? What gives you life? So if you haven't done a lot of the different things at church that you could do there, you might not even know what kind of a vocational role you could go into in a church. Like, do you want to be a youth pastor? Like me, I'm not a youth pastor. I'm way too intense for youth. Like it's just not me. I'm not a kids pastor. That's not my shtick either. So, there are some things that I know that I'm wired for, but I learned that from doing other things. Yeah. So get involved at your church, get in your quiet time, spend time with the Holy Spirit, get involved at your church. And then I would find somebody who is vocational and ask them to just fill your resource list with stuff that you should really start focusing on, like great books. Are you listening to other people preach? That's one of the things that I did all the time. I mean, I had my pastor's sermons I'd listen to, and then I had 3 or 4 other guys that I would follow and just, get a couple sermons a weekend at least.
Yeah. Stop listening to that podcast and listen to some other, whatever we all fill our time with things.
Yeah.
And we can, while we're working, while we're driving, there's time. People have so much more time than they realize or admit when you think about what really do I give my time to that.
Yes. It's not going to bear fruit.
Yeah. So, hey, so final thoughts.
Okay.
Before we jump off, anything you want to share to anyone listening out there? I mean, we've covered a lot. So I think it's one of those, like, is there anything you said where you're like, oh, I wish I'd go into it further, or I'd maybe soften it a little bit over here, or man, there's this one thing that I just love. I mean, we've been kind of talking to pastors, ministry leaders, people who want to run at ministry harder.
Yeah.
High level discipleship talk. Like,
yeah. So I guess last final thought would be if you're planning or considering going into ministry, if You feel like God's called you to disciple people. And by the way, if you've accepted Jesus, he has called you to disciple people.
Yes.
But if those thoughts and those questions are bouncing around in your head, the question that I would tell you really need to ask yourself is, do I love people? You need to know the answer to that question, and it needs to be yes, because people are the point.
Yeah.
Like people are the reason that Jesus died, because he loves people and he cares about them enough that he was willing to live a perfect life and die a painful death to atone, to not just make a way that we could be with him forever, but that we could live free lives while we're here and see that freedom given to other people. Like, people are the point. And if you don't love people, if you're focused on a platform, or you're focused on learning something new and having all this knowledge in your head, that's not the goal. The goal has to be people.
That's good. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, man. Glad I could be here.
Hey, thank you so much for checking out the show today. I want to invite you to check out the next show. And listen, if you are wanting to learn more about better, strategic, thoughtful, intentional discipleship and disciple making, please subscribe, follow us on whatever platform you love to listen or watch on. Please do like, comment, share. Check out ordinarymovement.com for all the resources that we provide in disciple making, discipleship frameworks and pathways and processes that equip everyday, ordinary men and women who want to follow Jesus and be disciples, who make disciples. Finally, I just want to invite you, please drop a comment. Let me know what questions you have. Feel free to give me feedback. I'm growing as a podcast host. I would love to hear from you. That being said, check out the next show, and we'll see you next time.